This webinar is being recorded, so if you at any time want to go back, you'll be able to check this out on our YouTube channel. So I'm with the Interreligious Eco-Justice Network. We are a faith-based environmental group in Connecticut working with religious communities on an interfaith basis on environmental issues such as climate change. And so we're very pleased to be able to bring you this webinar today featuring some really wonderful speakers on the topic of intersectional environmentalism. This webinar is called Environment, Justice, Identity and the 2020 Elections. And it is sponsored by our IREJN and Emmanuel Congregational Church. We're very grateful for Emmanuel Congregational Church's continued support. That's really wonderful. And we also have some upcoming webinars, which I can put up on the screen a little bit later on sustainable diet, gardening. We're really working to provide webinar opportunities that people can apply in their everyday life, especially during COVID when we can't all get together in groups. There are many things we can do in our everyday life to make an impact for the planet. So I will stop my share here, and I'm going to turn it over to our moderator, Peterson Toscano, who is an amazing human being. He is going to moderate a wonderful panel, and he is as described in his bio, a quirky queer performance artist and scholar. He is nationally known as a radio host. He's currently working on a book. He is extremely artistic and creative, and I know that you're going to enjoy the discussion that he's going to moderate for us today.
Oh, hello everyone. It's so great to be here. Thank you so much for coming to the Zoom. This is the Zoom where it happens. My name is Peterson Toscano. And those of you who are environmentally minded, you're going to be really happy about my role because I technically am a hybrid. I was brought on as a panelist, but then I was also made the moderator. So I'm both a panelist and a moderator. I'm a hybrid. And we've got a really great panel, and we want this to be very engaging for you. So there's going to be times for you to get involved. We'll have a poll at one point where you get to share some of your thoughts and opinions. And there's going to be a nice chunk of time for Q&A. So throughout the presentation, as questions come up, think about those questions and get ready to ask them. There'll be opportunities to do that through the chat. So what I'm going to do is introduce you one by one to each of our panelists. We've got a little video for each one to kind of give you a sense of who they are and what they do. And so let's just go to our first panelist, and I will share. So excited. Welcome, Sena. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
It's good to see you. So a quick question for you, because just already from that video, you're obviously a very engaged person, and you are not in high school, but you're high school age. You're in college, right?
Yes.
Yeah, but you're high school age. So you're clearly someone who has a very full life.
Yeah, thank you.
So what do you do? So what do you tell yourself to keep you motivated in all this work you're doing?
Yeah, so I think that there are definitely times when maybe my motivation, can get a little bit lacking or whatever. But especially with environmental things, I think I just tell myself that there are a lot of good people out there who are fighting for the same things that I am, and together, we can make a difference as long as we, we work hard at it and all kind of join together.
Yeah, that's good. And in this time of coronavirus, when we're so separated, that's even more important to remind ourselves of that. So thank you for that. Well, then let's bring our next panelist on. So excited about our, this whole panel is just like the who's who in the Hartford area of people. Welcome, Alex. I have like serious questions for you, but I really want to ask you barista questions, but I will abstain from that. Maybe they'll come up in the Q&A, who knows? But in your own activism and advocacy work that you do, how do you recharge and stay energized?
That's an excellent question, Peterson. Wellness is just so important to the movement because we can be out advocating, be it online because of coronavirus or in the streets, socially distant. We could do that for 8 hours a day, and something that helps me recharge is getting outside. During the coronavirus, a lot of my work has been remote. I've had the privilege of working from home to keep others safe, as well as my family. And I just really find myself constantly longing to be away from my computer screen after after the day is called off for the most part.
So you get out to area, well, there's some lovely parks in the Hartford area. Is there a particular park that you end up going to?
Yes, there's a park right down the street from me, 2 minutes away, Kennedy Park. I go there often. I go there for jogs. I go there to stroll. I have my bagel in the morning. It's a good place to be.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Are we ready for our last panelist? Let's bring him on. Deacon Art, welcome.
Thank you. It is certainly a joy to be here and to be with such extraordinary young folks who are doing much more than I did when I was their age. It's an honor to be here.
And you've been doing it for a long time. I mean,
yeah, because I'm old.
We learn from the greats.
Disciplined and consistent, and faith is a big part of your life. And so I'm wondering, like, are there regular spiritual practices that you maintain that helps keep your ministry sustainable?
Yes, Peterson, there is. At the very, very dawn of the morning, when all is quiet, I try to sit in humble prayer and just recognize the presence of God before the busyness begins and the swirl of chaos has its way with me. There's that morning bliss where the peace of the world comes to you. And you can notice it if you're quiet enough. And then in the evening, before I go to bed, there's a moment of thankfulness. Even if there's been chaos all the day long, there's a time to be loved by God. And I, as best I can, imagine myself in the arms of God and all the the difficult parts melt. And I'm strengthened again in the morning. So yeah, there is.
Thank you. Well, welcome panel. And I'm so excited because we've been talking a lot about your work, your insights. And if I were to ask you the question, what are you fighting against? It'd be very easy for us to identify the troubles, the problems, the enemies, the challenges. But my husband taught me something really important. He was part of the anti-apartheid struggle in South Africa. He's a South African. And he said whenever they would get together for a big meeting or a rally, no matter what was going on, somebody's job at the end was to stand up and talk about what the new South Africa is going to look like. And would say, in the new South Africa, and they would just talk about what it was they were fighting for, giving them a clear vision of the new world that they were creating. So here's my first question for the panel. What are you fighting for? Describe the world you want to co-create.
So I'll begin. I am fighting for a world in which everyone has dignity in their lives, that we have our most basic needs met. Climate change and environmental racism has wreaked havoc on our communities, is wreaked havoc on Black, Indigenous, and person of color communities. I want to take a moment to acknowledge that this today marks 3 years after Hurricane Maria, and we have not forgotten the disastrous response to giving aid to Puerto Rico in their time of need, and the lack of environmental policies there were in place to keep them protected. When President Trump took the presidency, he rolled back every environmental protection he could, and he's still doing it to this day. And that has had very disastrous side effects on many communities across the nation, but Puerto Rico comes to mind in particular when I think about this. It's so crucial that we fight for a world in which everyone's needs are met. Would Deacon Art or Sena like to go next?
Sena?
Thank you. Yeah, so I think, Alex, I share a lot of similarities with, the world that I guess I'd like to co-create with all of you and everybody else. So yeah, the first thing that comes to mind is a world where everybody can live with dignity and with respect, no matter what their race, their gender, their sexual orientation, any of that, where where they can live with dignity and respect. And then I think also just fighting for a more just world, and this goes hand in hand with what I just said, but a world where your future is not, dependent on your zip code or the job that your parents had. And then something that I've also been thinking a lot about today and yesterday with Ruth Bader Ginsburg's passing is that I'm fighting for a world where, where you can pass away in peace, not fearful of, the future of our country. And also a world where young people, children can grow up without feeling like something cataclysmic might happen at any moment and without that kind of constant fear of what our future might be.
They say there are 2 great days in your life, the day you're born and the day you figure out why. And I think all of us, that why is elusive. It depends so much on the urgency of the moment, the urgency of now, Dr. King put it. And the urgency right now seems to be a full kaleidoscope of pandemic events. I mentioned earlier about the blessed mornings that I am so humbled to experience. But in the same sense, I'm in deep prayer for those who are in the western part of this great nation of ours, whose mornings are burnt in orange with fire. My why is whatever problem is in front of me at the moment. And a part of that, as Alex had mentioned, is the environmental racism, but it is not only environmental racism, it's environmental poverty that impoverished nations, impoverished people. The very opportunities to live in a clean world, they often don't have the voice to be able to declare they want freedom. The horrid things that are happening in Brazil with the forests, here with air, China, everywhere. And it's primarily people who have power normally, I shouldn't say normally, but more often than not, rape our environment for money. And that's horrific. And so I would share with you that my responsibility is to do every single thing that I can do, that I personally can do to make my space, my time on this earth better. I can't change the world, but I should sure darn change the people and the places around me. And as best I can, help affect others so that they can affect others. And so my why is, how am I affecting others so that not only my space, but their space will be better?
And for me, there's definitely two things I'm fighting for. One, that there's enough empathy and cultural understanding that when somebody comes out as lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, non-binary, there's not a lot of confusion or questions, that people know exactly what that is and know how to celebrate that and are full throttle into celebration. So that's one thing I'm fighting for. And the other is that no matter what your zip code is, Sena, you mentioned zip code, no matter what your zip code is, you're going to be able to breathe in deep and have nice, clean air. Because even if you look at Hartford, where people live and the asthma rates and the pollution rates, it's different. And it's often based on class and race. And I'm looking to see a world that is free of fossil fuel pollution, which is within our grasp to do that, to change our energy economy and our system and how we energize our world. So for health reasons, and also to begin to address the horrible impacts of climate change. So that's the world that I'm fighting for. And and I just know that there's people in this Zoom watching and the attendees here that are also in the same fight. And with that, for the attendees, as a panel, we got together and we said, we're really kind of curious about you. You're here, and we have some questions for you, actually, in the form of 3 polls. And Terry's going to share these polls for you. And we're going to ask you to answer these poll questions as honestly as possible. They are anonymous. We don't know who's saying what to these poll questions. And then we'll get to share the results. Panelists, unfortunately, you cannot vote. But we'll share the results, and you'll get to see what people are thinking. There are 3 questions, so make sure you scroll down all the way to the bottom. And if at any point you're having any trouble, just put it into the chat to me or Terry that you're struggling to get onto the poll or whatever we're doing. Now we're tabulating the results. I have some predictions. I'm going to keep it to myself. We'll see. Whenever you're ready, Terry, whenever you think you got most people. and share the results. I hope we don't have any of those undecided voters in the room. I'm always kind of amazed, right, at the undecided voters. I kind of want to get in their heads. I'm like, what's going on there?
I'm more curious as to those who are not registered to vote.
Hmm.
I went to jail back in 1963 when I was 17 because of a civil rights call to action, and I went and protested and sat in the street, and at that moment I knew that when I turned 21, back in those days you had to be 21, that I would vote in absolutely every election, because people I knew at that time were dying so that folks could vote.
Yeah, Deacon Art, I'm 16 right now. I can't vote, and I'm waiting like desperately to be able to vote, and then seeing those people who aren't voting, and I'm just similarly very frustrated. Like, how are you not voting right now? Like, I don't understand.
Sena, your voice is so important. Don't ever, 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 ever lose your voice. And most importantly, don't you ever let anybody take it.
Well, we have our poll results. I think everyone should be able to see those. You see the poll results, panelists?
Yay.
So everyone who responded is registered to vote. I'm very glad to hear that. And yes, Deacon Art makes me cry. There's a lot of comments going on about people really appreciating the panel, and most people are going to do the mail-in or absentee ballot. I'm assuming many of the people here are also from the state of Connecticut. I actually live in Pennsylvania, which is the swingingest of swing states. And so where it really matters that people step up and vote.
Oh, I'm sorry. You meant in terms of red or blue. I was thinking of jazz.
And it seems like there are no Donald Trump voters in the Zoom. They're on my street, though. I live in a very conservative part of the world. So, okay, well, now we have a sense of who's in the Zoom. Thank you for responding. Sena, you have a question for the panelists.
Yeah, so, right, yeah. So as an activist or an organizer, or however, you want to label yourself, you have to work with a lot of people. And that's definitely one of my favorite parts of this work. I love going to get out and talk to people. But it can also be really difficult at times, because sometimes, you have to work with people who, you mostly agree with, but you might disagree over tactics or goals or, other things. So how do you deal with those kind of relationships? Because those are hard, and they make like organizing a lot more difficult. And I'm just curious how you deal with those and how you figure out how to like best work with everybody.
Oh, do you mind if I start this?
Please.
I'm, as you know, a Catholic clergy, and my church is in Simsbury. And I love the people. And we don't agree necessarily on many things, but I will share with you that what we do agree with is far more important than what we do not. For example, every person in the United States wants proper policing. People who march for Black Lives Matter and people who march for All Lives Matter both want proper policing. The difficulty comes in when trying to discuss what is proper policing. We don't spend enough time on the things we agree with, and learn to respect one another's beliefs in terms of what we agree with and why. So I spend much more time on what we agree with before we enter into the part of what we don't agree with. But I have many different friends and neighbors who I'm politically disagree with, but what we agree with is that we want a nice neighborhood. We both believe in God, all of the things that make us friends and neighbors and Americans, or Black or white or whatever it might be, we can find something that we agree on. And that's what we build our relationship on. Now, there are two kinds of relationships, a good one and a bad one. So, I mean, you have close ones and not so close ones. So some are just not as close as others.
So I'd like to chime in. In my time organizing with the Connecticut League of Conservation Voters, I've learned that it is so crucial to meet community members where they are in their advocacy, because there is a big difference between someone who is going out to their first protest and someone who is organizing their 6th or 7th community meeting. There's a level of expectations there that we would love to meet, but everyone's at a different level. Environmental justice is an intersection of other types of justices. It's disability justice, it's immigrant justice, it's racial justice, women's justice, you name it, the list goes on. And having a wide collaborative and being able to share space with other activists and organizers to share the work that they're doing in the community, and coming into those meetings and really laying out the ground rules for respectful and well coordinated actions is something that I've been learning to keep more in mind. Everyone has ambitions. Everyone is coming from different walks of life, and so we want to honor them in their path as well, because it is a long one. I think that is what I would have to say about that: respectful and intentional interactions, and taking a look at your room and seeing who is missing, and then doing your best to make a relationship with those who are not there, because the environmental movement has been a historically white-led movement, and it is up to us as youth, as persons of color, and as members of the LGBTQ community and so forth, to really meld our truths together and our struggles. Peterson, would you like to add on?
Yeah, I'm so glad Sena asked this question, because it is, I think, one of the things that can really trip up a lot of activists, because if you don't fully agree with somebody, sometimes, particularly now in this social media age, it's like everything gets put into their little categories. But there's some issues that are so big that you have to work with someone who you totally disagree with on other issues. Climate change, for instance, is one of those things. And the reality is, it's not a red or a blue issue. It's very much a generational issue. There are a lot of young Republicans who are super concerned about climate change. And I work for Citizens Climate Lobby. I do their podcast, and I'm a volunteer advocate, go to DC and lobby to put a price on carbon. And it's a bipartisan group, so we're working really hard to get Republicans involved. In February, right before the whole pandemic, we all met, a bunch of people met in DC. It was all conservatives. And I went, as the host of Citizens Climate Radio, to just hear what they had to say. I am not a conservative, but I wanted to hear, what are their values? And that's one of the keys, because although we may disagree on policy and on lots of things, we often share the same values. And one of the most common values that most Americans share is protecting the people and things that we love. And it was fascinating to hear these conservatives express their incredible passion to do something about climate change based on their values. And I have an episode of Citizens Climate Radio where I feature 8 conservatives talking about why, as conservatives, they care about climate change. And it reminded me that, you know, you can care about the same thing for different reasons. And we both cared about the same things. For a lot of them, it had to do with fiscal responsibility. It's not what I think about when I think about climate change. I'm thinking about human rights. But that was really helpful. The other thing that really helped me is to understand that we have different roles. And there's been a lot of teaching about social roles. Eileen Flanagan, a Quaker, taught me this, that traditionally in change movements, there are 4 traditional roles. I'm going to put them in the chat for you. There's the rebel, the advocate, the organizer, and the helper. And sometimes a whole organization can be one more than the other. So Sena, you're kind of the rebel, right? In that you're going there to put pressure on the system, and that's what Extinction Rebellion does, that's what Sunrise does. It does that nonviolent direct action. While Alex, you're more of the advocate role, that you're working within the system with elected officials, trying to change policy and all. And although there's connections there between the two, you kind of have different techniques. Other people are the organizers. They go in and just try to organize a community. And then for whatever you're doing, you need helpers, people to make sandwiches, to give people rides, to, you know, do all that stuff. And some organizations function in one or more of these roles. And so I think it's about respecting personality and, you know, where people are kind of aligned and how they feel like this is kind of my thing. And respecting that and recognizing everybody has a part to play in this.
I think that's the first time I've ever been called a rebel, so thank you. I'm not generally considered rebellious by like my parents, but yeah, but thank you all. That was really helpful, and I'm really glad that I got to hear, you know, each of your perspectives on that question.
Cool. Well, I have got a question for Alex, but I actually would like everyone to chime in on this one, because I think, you know, part of this panel is about identity. And I think for the climate movement, I believe very much it's important to show up as yourself. And when I first got involved with climate work, I made that choice. Like, I'm showing up not just as Peterson, but Peterson who's a Quaker, who also is gay. And that is part of what I bring. And it changes the way I look at the climate movement. So one of the messages I heard all the time was, we need to do it for the children and the grandchildren. I totally agree. I don't have any children or grandchildren. So could you give me another reason why I should do it? I mean, I could do it for your children and grandchildren, but why else? And people struggle to then articulate, well, what are the other reasons? By having diversity in these movements, it helps to challenge the thinking. So Alex, a question for you and for the rest of the panel to consider, in your own work that you're doing, when you're looking at your identity, why do you believe an intersectional environmental movement is important? And what does that even look like? Because I think there are people in the audience who have heard this word intersectional, but they don't always kind of maybe fully understand, what does that look like? So why is an intersectional environmental movement important, and what does that look like?
I think an intersectional environmental movement is important because people want to feel represented. If you look back this past summer at the demonstrations led by those standing in solidarity with the Black Lives Matter movement, there was so many people who came out, white, Black, Hispanic, Asian, that solemnly swore they do believe Black Lives Matter, and some of them showed up and demanded policy action to hold police accountable to certain standards. An intersectional environmental movement is important to me because I had originally gotten involved because I was worried about my community's access to clean drinking water. My community's drinking water was scouted out by a private company in 2016, and they eventually won the bid for that area of land and are pumping out water to this day. And to add on to that, Hurricane Maria made the environmental movement more, an intersectional environmental movement more clear to me, more important, because it was my own family, it was relatives and family friends that were impacted by the neglect of federal aid. It makes me feel so sad, but it fires me up. And so that is why an intersectional environmental movement is important to me, because when it happens in your backyard, when environmental racism, when climate change, when a paradigm of these issues strikes your community, you feel it for the long haul. Deacon Art, would you like to share your experience, your convictions?
You know, Alex, you know, the idea of intersectional change and the import of it, I thought of it when Peterson mentioned his husband's nationality. I remember years ago, was 60 years ago or so, during the height of apartheid, the white South Africans required that Black South Africans wear tags and identity tags. And they required that there be a photo, and Polaroid camera was used to make those pictures. 7,000 miles away on the south side of Chicago, my mother decided that there would never be a Polaroid camera in our house because of what Polaroid did. Now, I know her decision to not allow anyone in our family, not only to not own one, but not, if anyone did, could not bring it in our house. This South African government could care less, but it meant everything to my family. It was the very foundation of the beginning of recognizing what we do and who we are is love each other and love the creation that we are also blessed to live in. You know, my mom was an extraordinary woman who taught us not only to care about others, but to care about ourselves. I remember we moved into this white community when I was 11 years old, and we went to church, and I don't know what happened because I was 11 and I had my 13-year-old and 9-year-old brother were all at church, and all we did was poke each other, and the mass was in Latin, so we really weren't paying that much attention anyway. But on the way home, my mom was frustrated and angry, and we didn't know why. But what we discovered on her way walking home, she muttered, "That man is not going to put me out of my church." And what happened was the priest was a racist and didn't want that new Black family coming to that church. But from that day on, my mother sat in the front pew, and she went to daily mass, which she had never done before. It is our responsibility to pass on to those who follow us the same passion, the same determination that we are about the business of being change agents in an environment that may not be what it's supposed to be. So that intersectionality can happen anytime and in any place, but it requires that we stand by, our truths. If no one else knows, we know.
And I remember, Deacon Art, when we first were having this conversation, I mentioned how when I think about climate change, just like with criminal justice system and so many things, we're all in the same boat together. We're just not all on the same deck. To which you said, some people are not even in the boat.
Correct.
And that, I think that's what we need to recognize, that when a storm hits, when there's trouble in the world, it doesn't hit everyone equally. The existing prejudices, the existing problems are then magnified. And so people have different experiences of the same experience. But what do you think, Sena? What for you in the work that you're doing with Sunrise and all? I know intersectionality is really, really important to that movement. Do you have any thoughts about this particular question?
Yeah, definitely. So I guess when I think about an intersectional movement, I think it kind of goes back to something that Alex said earlier, which is that although it's getting better, it is still often primarily white and primarily older, and it's it's frustrating, and it needs to change because those are generally not the people most affected by climate change. They're on the nice deck or the nice boat, going back to your example. And so when I think about an intersectional environmental movement, I think about a movement that actually looks like the communities who are impacted and will be impacted most by environmental issues. And I also think about how important that is in terms of, those people, those organizers, those community members know how not only, to address climate change and environmental issues in their community, but also how to, also tackle other social justice issues at the same time, like racism or, any other social justice issue, which is so intersecting with climate change. And so I just think that's really, really important. And then Peterson, I actually just wanted to go back to something that you said about bringing your full authentic self to the climate movement. And I think that's really interesting because it is something that I've been thinking about too in the last, couple months, and kind of realizing that definitely walking into those rooms, it does sometimes feel like I'm being judged for who I am, and there are, things that I will leave out or hide or not talk about, like growing up on a farm. I didn't talk about that for a really long time. Still don't really talk about it that much, actually. And it's just kind of, strange how these spaces, right, which are supposed to be building toward this better future, at the same time can be so judgmental. And I hope that that's something that we can kind of get rid of, because I don't think if we keep judging like this, I don't think it's going to be intersectional the way it should be.
Yeah. Very soon we're going to move on to Q&A from the audience. And audience, there's a section that in the Zoom here that says Q&A. If you click on that, you can type in your questions. Terry will then ask us questions. But before we do, Deacon Art, you're going to take us home with this portion, and you have a question for the panelist.
Yes, and what was it again?
Well, we had one question, but then you were going to ask a harder question. So you originally were going to ask what gives you hope, but then you talked about the two important moments in your life, being born and understanding why, and then you were going to ask us the incredibly hard question, why were you born? Which I hope you don't.
It is something that I've asked many groups when I speak or do a reflection, and it is so vital. It's so deeply spiritual, because our why is the reason. In your story earlier, Peterson, when they would talk about at the end of the day, they would describe, how wonderful the day or whatever it was that you had said. For me, I need to have my why so that I can get up in the morning and be passionate. And that was begun, it's evolved in my life, truth, and loving the world with a passion that I would be willing to die for. And so my question is, as you search for your why, and Sena, I'd love to ask you first. And I'm asking you because for me, you are my hope. That as I get older, people have often said to me, we're standing on your shoulders. And my response is, I don't want anyone standing on my shoulders. Because when you stand on my shoulders, the only place you're going is where I've been. And so I need to see people like you and you too, Alex, who are passionate. But it's time now to begin the idea of concretizing that why. And so could you begin right now, even if it isn't fully formed?
Yeah. So I definitely don't think it's fully formed. But I think, hearing you put it that way, I do think it's continuing the work that's already been started by people of past generations in this fight for justice, like we were talking about at the beginning, in this fight for dignity and respect for everybody. And so I think that's kind of where I'm moving, and I'm still working on it and thinking about it all the time, Yeah, but I think that's kind of what I want to do with my life and my why. And for me, I think it's something that I think about in terms of climate change and the climate crisis, because that is in a lot of ways, the defining issue of my generation, along with other social justice issues as well. And so I guess I really hope that like looking back on past leaders who have done incredible things and who I just look up to a lot, who are incredibly inspiring. I hope that I can kind of take their work and continue moving forward with that, and carry it forward and keep building and keep making the world a better place.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Alex, you're not that much older than her, so.
Yeah, Deacon Art, that is an excellent question. If I'm to answer this, I think what I have to say is the reason why I get up every morning is because I am a hopeless optimist. I am in pursuit of a better world every day, and I put my heart into one program in particular lately, voting rights, turning out as many people as possible to cast their ballot for their convictions, so that they can have a hand in changing the system. It obviously comes with more responsibility than just voting. There is constant education, advocacy, relationship building that I have to surround myself with continuously, so that I'm not only living in my reality, but that I adopt the realities of others. It requires me to check my privilege as a lighter skinned Puerto Rican man. It makes me truly want to connect with others to figure out what kind of world they would want to leave behind, and find the median between our goals. That is a big part of how I open community meetings. I like to talk about shared identity, shared struggle, because when you identify a common oppressor, you identify a similar goal, and you identify similar likes, music, dancing, and so forth, it is possible to turn those things into a spectacular movement. I've had the privilege of working with Sena on more than one occasion. I moved by her work every day. I've been organizing with the league a few years, and at the beginning, I felt like I was the youngest person in the room in a lot of spaces. And so when I see Sena, I'm like, this is my comrade right here. We got to stick together, because she doesn't want Connecticut to go under. You know, I don't want Connecticut to go under either, and that is why I'm in this.
Thanks, Alex. I'm really glad I get to work with you. It's been really, really good to work together for the past year or whatever, year and a half.
Right on, man.
Yeah, I was so touched when you recognized your privilege that all of us in some way do. You know, I'm an educated Black man. I know that. I know who I am, and I know privileges come with that. Privilege earned, not unearned privilege, but earned privilege. But I also grew up in an environment where I had some unearned advantages. My parents were both educated. And as an educated, just because my parents were educated, I had an 80% greater possibility of going to college just because my parents did. I didn't pay for their tuition. And it is all of these things, these implanted intellectual, and most importantly, intellectual and spiritual curiosity came from how I grew up. That curiosity to go to the edges of my intellect and my spirituality, to discover more and more and more. And this goes into the opportunities to look at the environment to that edge, to take people there, to find it, to discover it, to come up with new solutions, new ideas. And that's what all of you are about. And I want you to know, I know I'm, you know, as I grow older, I'm 75. I might be able to do this another 4 or 5 years, but you guys will just be in the swing of things. Sena, you won't even be able to drink yet. But you know, it's such joy to see you. So thank you.
Thank you, Deacon Art.
Well, we are going to hear from our audience. They've been putting lots of great stuff into the chat, and they've been giving questions that Terry is going to stump us with, challenge us with, get us inspired by. Terry.
All right, I'm going to start with one that just caught my eye right away. It says, there are people I know who care about the environment, but also seem unmotivated to vote. How would you explain to these people the importance of voting as connected to environmental issues and policy?
I'd like to begin. We launched our voting rights program this past summer. Up until this past summer, my experience with voting rights was the occasional voter registration drive with community partners, and I had to introduce the problem this way. The COVID-19 pandemic is exacerbated by environmental racism. When people are struggling to breathe, when they are exposed to a variety of hazardous approved permits, when they are exposed to tar sands, when they are exposed to trash incinerators, and they're living with 19 of those on a regular basis, that has made the COVID-19 pandemic worse for those with pre-existing conditions, for those suffering with cancer, for those suffering asthma. And my heart goes out to all of you. I have asthma myself, and when you think about how these two problems collide, vote your conviction, vote for a better environment, research who has the best environmental platform, who will truly speak to the masses. And another thing is, cast your vote safely. The COVID-19 pandemic is still very much rampant in our communities today. I encourage everybody who can to vote by absentee ballot. There are instructions that I have worked with my team on to outline on our website, conservationeducation.org. So I encourage you all to vote safely and vote for your convictions.
When I'm talking to people who, I don't actually talk to that many people who aren't sure about voting, but when I do, I think that the thing that I try and emphasize is that it is, it affects you, you know, like yes, policies maybe affect some people more than others, but politics affects everybody. It affects your life. And so I think I try and take it, maybe like make it less conceptual and just more like, here is how it's actually affecting you right now. And then, you know, as far as the environment and climate change and voting, I think at this point, like, we really, you know, need leaders who are going to do something about climate change. And so I try and emphasize the urgency of climate change and why, without electing leaders who believe in science, who believe in aggressive climate action, you know, we're really endangering our future. And so I just, yeah, I guess I feel like that, sorry, was not a very clear answer, but I just try and emphasize the urgency and also how things are affecting you directly.
Yeah, I'm not as patient. One might say I was rather direct and insulting when I find that people aren't voting, and that may be because of, you know, my life experiences, and it's how dare you not, when, you know, they please beat me up because I was, you know, wanted folks to vote, and I took those knots upside my head, and you're not going to vote. And then I'm not going to tell you what I say after that, because everyone knows me as a very kind clergy person. But I would suppose I would challenge every aspect of their understanding of what it means to be an American.
I'm glad this question came up, and I think what I heard in the question is like, why is this happening? Like, why are there and actually polls show that there are a lot of environmentalists care about the planet, but they don't vote. And I'm not quite sure how they identify what an environmentalist is, but many of the major environmentalist organizations have a very large percentage of people who are older and white and more liberal. And I think, you know, partly what happens is people who are comfortable and that their lives are not at direct risk don't always feel the urgency to go and vote. So I think that's partly what happens. The other thing I think too is that a lot of times when, they're looking about what motivates conservatives rather, compared to liberals or progressives, is that conservatives are often very interested in local issues. And that they're very much involved in local politics. And a lot of the most important environmental issues can actually be, addressed in a community. I mean, so many things that affect the people there. But if you're not already engaged in your community, if you're not aware, if you happen to live in a part of the town where you're not experiencing the environmental disasters or difficulties, it's just not on your radar. And privilege has come up. And one of the privileges to having privilege is your privilege to not see what's going on in other parts of your own city. And when I moved to Hartford, I had this, incredible experience because my aunt, Italian-American family, she was pretty much disowned from a lot of the family because she married a Black man and they lived in Hartford, in a part of town that was mostly Black. So I got to see a part of Hartford that most of my white friends weren't seeing. That they didn't even know existed. And I think that is another reason why we need to bring everybody to the table and engage with each other to see that you can live in the same city but literally experience air in a different way. And that getting involved with local politics is really important, and it can be very rewarding because locally people can make big changes quickly, because if they don't, they get booted out of office.
I have another question. So this person says, how do you suggest we get involved right now? Being a senior at university during a pandemic makes it a little difficult for me to figure out how to physically get involved in the environmental movement.
So I can jump in really quick. So I'm a junior at UConn. And so I definitely understand that struggle. So I guess the first thing I'd say, if you want to get involved on your campus, a lot of the environmental groups are still meeting. They're just meeting virtually, which obviously it's not the same, but it's a way to kind of get your foot in the door. And so I guess my suggestion actually would just be to try and do something virtually, because I don't think that there are a lot of environmental things happening right now in person. I do know that there is some actions going on Friday, September 25th. There will be marches and strikes around the country and around the world. But as far as getting, involved on a local basis or on your college campus, I would really suggest looking for a club, looking for an organization, and getting involved with them online, because I think that's a really good way to start connecting with people. And then from there, once COVID is over, you can start, getting involved with those people in person and doing things in person.
If I could, sometimes when folks are in a circumstance and they can't be as extraordinary as Sena is. In fact, I don't think there are many who can, but sometimes folks just want to do little things. For those who just want to do little things, if you're walking down the street and you see some paper, pick it up. Or if you're in a grocery store and you see those carts not in the corral, put it in the corral. Treat the earth and where you live like it's your living room, but that means you must have a clean living room. But it is very little things you can do right now. I've walked down the street and there's just a plastic bottle, someone threw away. I just put it in recycle. We can do little things. And if you're walking by that, then you're really not that concerned about your environment. We all, as Peterson had put together different aspects of what we do, we can't all be leaders and all can organizers, but every single one of us can do the little things.
One thing that I find helpful when I'm talking particularly on college campuses, because I think people, Deacon Art, I think people sometimes when they hear what you're saying, they agree and they disagree in that, we're looking at these problems that have such scale. And I think sometimes people get frustrated. I get very frustrated when people say, well, lower your carbon footprint. And then you do the math and you realize all of our individual carbon footprints added up, sure, it's significant, but there's so much polluting that happens outside of our homes to keep the infrastructure going that it almost feels like you're distracting us from the real problem. And why should I as a citizen fix a problem that I didn't cause? Maybe I'm part of the problem, but I didn't cause it. You're supplying me with so very few options. And so I think sometimes there's a disconnect because they hear there's this serious problem and then the solutions are tepid in response to them. And I think faith communities at times can give tepid responses.
Oh gosh, yes.
And so I think we have to recognize that these are huge systems changes that have to happen, that it's literally how we get our energy and how the world operates. And I think that, like, being honest about that's helpful, but then I think also there are things that we can really engage with, and particularly with climate adaptation, because climate change affects every community, and whatever you care about is probably affected by climate change, down to your pet. So like I'll do a whole workshop with college students about pets and climate change. How does climate change affect your pets? And I'll ask people, do you have a pet? Do you know where the closest emergency pet shelter is? Because often if there's an evacuation, you can't bring your pet with you to most shelters. And now with climate change, even if you don't live on the coast, you could experience extreme flooding from these sudden downpours. So knowing how to protect your pet from new pests that are coming up from Texas and the South because of the change in the climate, that's one area of your life of something you care about that you could actually do something and then educate other people. So one thing, to the person who asked the question, specialize in something. If there's something you really care about, learn about that thing. How does climate change affect that? How is that a justice issue? Learn about that and share that, because a lot of people still aren't talking about climate change, and you can break that silence. And that's something that's your thing, your piece of that pie, because yes, we can care about everything, but we only can do the next significant step that's in our path.
Yeah, I agree. And I think I go back to my mom and apartheid and that Polaroid camera. It had no effect on Polaroid, but it had an effect on us. So the little things that we do is not so much that we're affecting the environment, or that one little cart going back or one little bottle, but what it changes is us. And if that's the part that affected me, that caused me to be who I am today. And so it is that idea of caring that causes me to attach myself to larger things, to greater things, the more difficult things, because the moral floor had been laid.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I have another couple. Man, there's some really good questions here. It's hard to choose. However, so here's the one I'm going to kind of combine Kim Stoner and Lynn Johnson's question. And so Kim wrote that New Jersey just passed a landmark environmental justice bill, which will require the New Jersey State Department of Environmental Protection to deny permits for power plants, incinerators, landfills, large recycling facilities, and sewage treatment plants in certain minority and impoverished neighborhoods if the projects pose health and environmental risks in conjunction with the threats those communities already face. So she's wondering, can we do something like this in Connecticut next year? And then Lynn had asked Alex how we can support the work at the Connecticut League for Conservation Voters, and sort of specifically what legislation is even being discussed. I mean, I know that the big session's not till next year or whatever, but what's in the hopper?
There is discussion about a special session either this week or before the end of September. What I've heard through the grapevines is Take Back the Grid, the Take Back the Grid Act that the Energy and Technology Committee have been talking about, is one priority. I've also heard strengthening the environmental justice law is another priority. So definitely keep an eye out. The Connecticut General Assembly, their website, cga.ct.gov, is definitely one to keep your eyes on this coming week. Just scroll down to the events section. I'm sure there will be opportunity for to go into CTN to view the deliberations potentially. To get at Lynn's question, something that I am doing is with the voting rights program is I am going to continue phone banking to raise awareness about absentee voting and how important it is to protecting public health and the environment. This past summer, I worked with my team and my volunteers to raise awareness about how important it was to get the absentee voting expansion bill passed in the first special session, and thankfully that was passed. We now have the opportunity to vote by absentee ballot on November 3rd. Secretary of State Denise Merrill has mailed out absentee ballot applications this past week. I received mine on Thursday. Definitely check your mailboxes daily. And if you have not received an absentee ballot application, you can download one off of the Secretary of State's website and make sure that goes in an envelope, in an inner envelope followed by an outer envelope, and drop it off at the official ballot box outside of your town hall. That is a mouthful, but that is, going back to the phone banking, I'm sorry. If you are interested in phone banking to raise awareness about absentee voting, email me at alex@ctlcv.org. I'll put my email in the chat.
So I had another question, actually. Let me find it. There's so many comments. This is from Joe Barnes, the Secretary of IREJN. With the interdisciplinary nature of climate change, how do you best engage in advocacy? And do you ever experience imposter syndrome when dealing with a subject outside of your area of expertise?
Welcome to my world. I do very interdisciplinary work around climate change. I mean, every day it's like I'm talking to a scientist or a poet or an activist, and I think it's often the job of a good journalist to fact check and to check in with colleagues. When I first started doing a podcast about climate change, Climate Stew, I turned to my friend Dr. Jennifer Bryan, who's one of the attendees here. She teaches environmental science at Watkinson School. And before, when I was still kind of insecure about talking about these stuff, I would send her my script and ask her for feedback and say, do I have this right? Is this correct? Is this a correct way of saying it? The importance of interdisciplinary work is that as a performer, as an artist, as a comic, I can communicate in a way that maybe a scientist can't. So if the scientists can, confirm that I've got the facts right, it's possible I can reach people in a whole other way. And that's the power of this interdisciplinary work. So, fact checking, working with colleagues, checking with people. And when you're corrected, don't get defensive. Say, well, you may or may not be right. Let me go check on that. The reality is, in all my climate talks, I actually don't have to talk much about climate science. There's not very much climate science people actually need to know to get the basics of it. It's all that other stuff about justice and about how we're feeling and values that really are the things that pull people in, I find.
That is That's so great. Does anyone else want to comment on that before I find another question? All right, so here's another question from, oh, go ahead.
Sorry. I was going to say one of the best things that I think Peterson alluded to, and that is having absolutely the best support system that you can. Having a broad array of resources, people or places that you can go so that you can find the correct response. I will share with you one of the greatest abilities I learned to say was, I don't know. And it took me a long time and a lot of maturity to allow me to even use those words, I don't know. I was filled with, I did not have custody of my ego. And it took a lot of time to get to that point. And I became a safer and more loving person by accepting my limitations. But there's nothing wrong. In fact, it is quite mature, I believe, to recognize there are things you do not know.
So that's actually kind of leads me into the next question from someone who's anonymous, but says, how do we as activists and people who genuinely care about the world take care of ourselves and of each other in the face of the onslaught of negative news we are exposed to every day? How do we not get burnt out and overwhelmed? What are some specific practices and techniques you suggest or engage in other than Deacon Art's beautiful morning and evening practices?
Well, since I was named in that, I have support groups. As the only African-American Catholic clergy in the Archdiocese, I have support groups that I need and that help me remain sane, that I can talk to. I have a spiritual director. I have a loving family, because burnout can happen. In my faith tradition, Jesus Christ even went into the desert to get away from the people sometimes. So, you know, Elijah ran away from Queen Jezebel because he was tired. Even Muhammad went into the desert to get away from folks. So it's okay for all of us at one point to recognize sometimes the cross is heavy.
Yeah, I really appreciate whoever asked this question. I guess I don't have a really good answer like Deacon Art, because this is still something I'm very much struggling with. Like yesterday was a kind of bad day for burnout. Just with Ruth Bader Ginsburg's passing, I was just having a really hard time and feeling really kind of down on the world. And so I guess what I'm trying to do and trying to, improve on is just having people who in my life who maybe understand kind of how I'm feeling and who are willing to just talk about it. And right now that's my parents most of the time. And I guess a lot of times it's not even that I want someone to tell me it's gonna be okay or this isn't gonna happen or whatever. It's kind of just having someone there to listen. So that's what I'm trying to do right now, but then also just like pacing myself, because I have a tendency to take on more than I can actually, do with school and activism and other stuff. So I think that's another thing that I'm just kind of working on and maybe is helpful for other people as well to try and prevent burnout.
Yeah, those of us, anyone who does this kind of work, we absorb so much of the world's pain all the time because we care, we're empathetic. And so that's why it's so important to experience ecstatic joy whenever possible. If it's dancing, if it's a massage, if, whatever the area it is that gives you joy, make time for that. That's not a luxury. That's not an extra. It's not something you don't deserve because there's more important things to do. You need to keep this work sustainable. I need to. And if I don't, I will burn out, and I'm not good for anyone, and my brain's all clogged up. And one very simple practice that has really altered my work happened after the 2016 election. When I go to bed, I leave all of my devices in the kitchen. I don't bring any of them into the bedroom. No phone, no laptop. The only thing I have is a Kindle because it's got books on it. And what's nice about that is it gets me quiet at night, but also when I wake up, it's not there for me to reach to the first thing, which was what I was doing and getting caught up in that whole deluge before I was even awake. So that's one very simple practice that helps me a lot.
You know, the best advice I've ever gotten was on an airplane. uh, you know, when you sit down, or used to, and the flight attendant goes through the different things you're supposed to do, put on your seatbelt and get your if your cushion is worth floating and your plane goes down in water, you can go ahead and pray on it because you're about to die. But the other, the other thing that the flight attendant tells you is to, if the air mask comes down, who do you put it on first? Yourself. Why? Well, the reason is you can't help anyone if you're dead. The most important thing you do is care for yourself, not in a selfish way, but recognizing that when you are filled with life, you can give life. And you must always make certain you love yourself. And love yourself so that you can give. And if you don't love yourself, then what you give won't be as wonderful as it could be. If we embrace not only anger, but exhaustion, we'll transmit anger and exhaustion. But if we love and are filled with eagerness and hope, we will transmit eagerness and hope. So you have to transmit what you are. And if you're down, you're going to transmit down. So make sure you care for yourself, because you're worth caring for.
On this question, I have to lean on my co-panelists, because that what you all have shared is something I have been struggling with, and so I thank you, and I'd give you all a hug if I could.
Alex, you call me anytime, brother.
Right on, Deacon Art.
That's amazing. And I actually think that is a perfect place to end our webinar for today.
Oh.
I am so sorry we didn't get to every single question, but this is recorded. It will be up on our YouTube channel, and I guess I should start putting our videos up on Facebook too. But I just want to thank all of our panelists for being with us today. That was a great conversation and so needed and so important. And you all are so inspiring to me personally. It was just really wonderful to just sit here and listen. And I hope all of our attendees also got a lot out of it. So we are really grateful to all of you, to our panelists and our attendees, for taking time out of this beautiful September afternoon to come and be a part of this.
Well, Sena, you too. I feel like I've just gained another son and granddaughter. So, well, grandson too. But thank you for allowing me to be in your world for a moment. I'm truly honored.
Peace and blessings to you, Deacon Art, and to Peterson, and to Terry and Lynn and everybody watching right now. God bless.
Yeah, you
Yeah,
guys.
if anyone needs to get a story out into the world, contact me, because that's what I want to do, is to provide these sort of platforms. And before it ends, Alex, I just want to thank you for that vulnerability and honesty. I think it's so wonderful the way you just kind of express that, like, hey, this is something I need to work on. That is just amazing modeling. that we need to see in the world, and I really value that.
Yeah.
Thanks, Terry and Lynn Johnson, for making this happen. Lynn Johnson
Yeah.
was one of the masterminds behind this whole
Yeah.
thing. So thank you for all the hard work to make this thing happen.
Yeah. Love you guys.
We love you too.
Alrighty. God bless. Yes. I have too much arthritis. I can't do that, Alex. God bless you guys.
All right, everyone.
Thank you
Have a
so
great
much.
night.
You too.